The Radium Girls. The women who glowed in the dark and paid for it. They were told the substance was safe enough to lick their paintbrushes with. They did it thousands of times a day. Within a few years, their jaws began to rot out of their own faces while they were still alive to feel it happen. The company that poisoned them knew exactly what radium did to the human body. They just needed workers who didn't. In the years following World War I, a new industry emerged around a genuinely revolutionary invention: luminous paint containing radium, a radioactive element discovered decades earlier by Marie Curie, which glowed faintly in the dark and was used to paint watch dials, clock faces, and military instrument panels so they could be read at night. Companies across the United States hired young women, many still teenagers, to perform the delicate, detailed work of hand-painting these tiny dials, a task requiring a fine, precise brush tip that workers achieved through a technique the companies themselves specifically instructed them to use, pointing the bristles with their lips. A process the workers came to call lip dip paint, repeated thousands of times across a single shift. At the time, radium was marketed to the public as something closer to a miracle substance than a hazard, incorporated into tonics, cosmetics, and even toothpaste, based on genuinely limited scientific understanding of radioactivity's long-term biological effects. The women hired to paint watch dials were reportedly told the radium paint was harmless. Some accounts suggest they were even encouraged to use it playfully, painting their nails, teeth, and faces with the glowing substance for their own amusement after their shifts, unaware they were essentially performing this act with a substance that would later be definitively classified as one of the most dangerous radioactive materials capable of human exposure. What the company's own scientists and management knew, however, according to internal documents and correspondence uncovered years later during subsequent legal proceedings, was considerably more alarming. Radium, once ingested, behaves chemically similarly enough to calcium that the human body deposits it directly into bone tissue, where it continues emitting radiation internally for years, slowly and catastrophically destroying the surrounding bone from the inside. Company management and the scientists studying radium's properties on their behalf were reportedly aware of radium's dangerous properties considerably earlier than they disclosed to the workers actually handling it daily, with management staff working directly with the material in laboratory settings using lead aprons, screens, and specialized tongs. Protective measures conspicuously never extended to the dial painters themselves. By the early 1920s, workers who had been employed painting radium dials for several years began experiencing devastating, inexplicable health problems. Many developed severe jaw pain and swelling that dentists initially misdiagnosed as ordinary dental problems, only to discover, upon further examination, that the women's jawbones were literally disintegrating, developing a condition that came to be known informally as radium jaw, in which the bone tissue died and fractured internally, sometimes crumbling apart entirely during routine dental examinations. Several affected women also developed severe anemia, spontaneous bone fractures throughout their bodies, and cancerous tumors, conditions considered virtually unheard of in otherwise young, healthy women of that era. Baffling doctors who had no established medical framework for understanding what they were witnessing. When affected workers and their families began pursuing legal action against their employers, seeking acknowledgement and compensation for what they correctly suspected were work-related injuries, they encountered fierce, sustained corporate resistance. Company-funded physicians and researchers repeatedly published studies attempting to attribute the workers' symptoms to other causes entirely, including, in one particularly cruel line of defense, suggesting the young women's ailments stemmed from syphilis rather than occupational radium exposure. A deliberate attempt to damage the women's public reputation and undermine their credibility in the eyes of the courts and the broader public. The legal battle that followed, particularly a landmark case brought by several affected workers who became known publicly as the Radium Girls, dragged on for years as the women's physical conditions continued deteriorating in real time, several of them arguing their cases in court while visibly suffering the effects of the very poisoning they were attempting to prove had occurred, some too weakened to raise their arms to take the courtroom oath without assistance. independent medical investigation, conducted by researchers with no financial ties to the companies involved, eventually confirmed definitively what the companies had denied for years, that the workers' radium exposure through the specific lip-dip paint technique had caused catastrophic, irreversible internal radiation poisoning, findings that directly contradicted years of company-funded research specifically designed to obscure that exact conclusion. The resulting legal settlements and subsequent litigation fundamentally transformed American occupational safety law, establishing crucial legal precedent regarding a worker's right to sue for damages related to occupational disease, and directly contributing to the eventual establishment of significantly stricter industrial safety regulations regarding radioactive materials and workplace hazard disclosure more broadly, protections that arrived, tragically, far too late for the women whose slow, agonizing deaths had been required to force the change in the first place. Many of the affected Radium Girls didn't live to see the full legal vindication their cases eventually achieved, dying from radiation-induced cancers and bone deterioration years before litigation fully concluded, their bodies remaining so radioactive after death that decades later, researchers exhuming remains for further scientific study were still able to detect measurable radioactivity using a Geiger counter held near their graves. A haunting, literal testament to just how permanently and thoroughly radium had infiltrated their bones. What makes the story of the Radium Girls endure as one of history's most significant labor rights cases isn't simply the horror of what radium did to their bodies, but the documented, deliberate corporate decision to continue prioritizing profit over disclosed safety information the companies themselves already possessed, allowing young women to poison themselves daily with a substance management already understood to be lethal, and then fighting for years, in court, to avoid acknowledging what they had already privately known all along. Decades later, their graves still glow faintly to instruments sensitive enough to measure it. A permanent, radioactive signature left behind by women who were told repeatedly that what was killing them couldn't possibly be true. If stories like this, where corporate silence cost lives long before anyone was finally forced to listen, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.